meeting for corporate performance and resources on this very cold evening. I hope you've all been safe and that you remain safe if you need to travel on after this. Before we get going, can I just do the usual announcement? Can I remind everybody present the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when they're not speaking? And if a participant wishes to speak, please use the raise hand function, or if you can be seen, please put your hand up. Please don't use the chat function to raise debate, and this is for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used really to highlight technical issues and to alert the attention of the chair, that's myself, or the Democratic Services Officer. If we can now move to agenda item 1, which is the apologies for absence. I don't know if we've had any that you're aware of, Mark?
No, I don't believe we've had anything direct, Chair, but I don't know if members have any to share.
No?
Apologies, Chair. Councillor Nick Wood, I'm not sure if he's on the call, but if he isn't, he's collecting his car from the garage, so he might be slightly late.
Okay, no problem.
But he may well be. No, I've just seen his name flash up, so he's here.
He's here.
Yeah.
Wonderful, marvellous. Okay then. Hello. Let's move on then to agenda item 2. That's the minutes of the meeting, our last meeting held on the 14th of December. Hope everybody's had a chance to go through them, and can we recommend that the minutes be approved as a correct and accurate record? Can I see a hand, please, to move on that?
Councillor Hanks, happy to approve.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Hanks. And Councillor Goodjohn seconding, yes? Lovely. Thanks ever so much. Okay then, so we'll move then on to agenda item 3. Now, this is the declarations of interest. I don't know if we've had any. Mark, again?
I've not had any through, Chair, but obviously members have got a chance now to declare anything if they wish.
Okay, doesn't look like anyone's got anything to declare. That's brilliant. So we've been asked if we can move the agenda around a little bit, and I see no reason not to. So agenda item 4 will come next, and we're going to start now, or rather after, and we're going to start first with what is the agenda item 5, and that's the reference to the cost of living support for food, warm spaces and other means of support. This is a reference that's come from Cabinet that sat on the 15th of December. And over to Tom now to talk us through. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Chair, and good evening, committee. Thanks for taking this reference, and thanks for tweaking the agenda as well, Chair. So, as you say, this is a reference from Cabinet. It's coming to your committee as well as it went to Homes and Safe Communities Committee last week. It's doing two things, Chair, drawing attention to the work underway to support residents during the cost of living crisis, and also drawing your attention as a committee to the Council's response to a national study by Audit Wales, and I'll come to that in a little while, if I may. The report sets out the well-known economic challenges facing the UK, Wales and the Vale of Glamorgan, both in terms of our residents, but also in terms of our organisation. And I know your committee spent a lot of time looking at the medium-term financial plan report that came from Cabinet in October, and we'll be considering the Council's budgetary response now in the coming weeks. But the report also gives some background to some of the work that as an organisation we've been doing, particularly in the areas of food insecurity that have been increasing both nationally and locally over the last couple of years. As an authority, we've been tracking the impact of the change in the economic environment associated initially with coronavirus, but latterly with the cost of living crisis for a couple of years now. And the report makes reference to a couple of pieces of research that have been undertaken through community impact assessment work locally, and also the Public Services Board Wellbeing Assessment, which was published back in the summer of last year. We saw over the last couple of years that food insecurity in particular has been increasing as an issue. There are about 11 food support organisations in the Vale of Glamorgan at the moment. They're providing a range of initiatives such as big box voids, so the pay-as-you-can type models, alongside the Vale Food Banks who provide that crucial crisis support. In the previous financial year, we received, through a mix of funding streams, about £100,000 in external funding, which allowed us to support a range of organisations, including schools, the council's food pod in Penarth, as well as our housing team and the Vale Food Banks themselves. Alongside that, the council, my team put together about 1,200 food and hygiene support parcels that went out via a range of different internal departments and our partners to people in absolute crisis. So that was work that was done in the previous financial year. The report itself then draws attention to the work that's been happening in 2022-23. Back in the spring, I brought together a cross-departmental group to look at the cost of living issues. I was keen to make sure that we were collectively bringing the work that was underway across the organisation together, and to focus it a bit more strategically to make sure that we were getting the maximum value out of that work. And committee will be aware that we've in the last 6 months recognised the cost of living as one of our corporate risks, both in terms of its internal and importantly external impacts. So the report provides you with, as a committee rather, with an overview of the funding that's been made available to support this effort over the last year. It talks about the Welsh Government's cost of living scheme, which committee will be aware comprised two parts: the mandatory £150 that was available to all band A to D council taxpayers and those residents in receipt of council tax reduction. There was a second discretionary element to that scheme that was targeted to those potentially who'd fallen through the gaps of the mandatory scheme and or those that were most impacted by the crisis. And cumulatively to date, over 36,000 households in the Vale have received support through that scheme. We've also been responsible for processing the winter fuel scheme on behalf of Welsh Government, their £200 payments. Over 8,500 people have been paid that to date, with a further 900 or so applicants currently being processed. The report provides committee in paragraph 2.5 with a list of a range of other schemes that have come through Welsh Government. Those schemes include community food organisation support for food partnerships, and support for warm spaces in the winter. The report that went to Cabinet was obviously on the 15th of December, and as at today's date, £158,900 has now been spent or has been transferred to community organisations and others of the 166,000 that is available. That is collectively supporting over 5,000 people every week. However, that also includes the number of people that are visiting our libraries. So it's not exactly that number. We're currently waiting on some further information relating to the £97,000 of food partnership funding. That's going to be coming to the local authority and for us to work in collaboration with our partners in the Health Board, Public Health, and we'll be bringing some further information to Cabinet in due course on that one. The report breaks down some of the examples of how that funding has been used. So, for example, the household support funding was awarded to 6 local support organisations to help them to purchase additional stock. We've seen reports of a reduction in donations directly from the public as a result of increasing costs of living. So that's helped to supplement those stocks there. We've also committed money from the Direct Food Support Fund to do a similar thing. As part of the discretionary cost of living scheme that the council designed, £50,000 was identified to support community organisations. That's been through a mix of support for the Vale Food Bank, which is run by Trussell, and again a mix of stock but also an additional vehicle for them to make deliveries and collections. as well as supporting a range of schools within Barry, the Penquitra school cluster, with a community-based project as a result of that funding. The report also then goes on to talk about the council's Warm Welcome Croeso Cynnes scheme, which we've received funding from Welsh Government to support. We've now allocated that to a range of community organisations. That's to provide warm refreshments, room hire, contributions to utility bills and volunteer expenses. And really, the aim is to create a network across the county which can offer a warm welcome to residents at no charge, with free refreshments, potentially access to support and advice, as well as various other activities in order to tackle social isolation, loneliness, and importantly, to give people somewhere warm that they can go to. I'm really pleased to say that the Warm Welcome webpage being launched on the council's website is performing well in terms of the number of interactions. That's got an interactive map and a search directory that allows people to identify locations and times that those are operating in their area. And there are currently 33 warm spaces listed on the directory. We had a really good discussion at the Homes and Safe Communities Committee last week, and members expressed an interest in further expanding that network. And I've got meetings now with a number of elected members in the coming days to look at what else we can do there. The report then moves on to talk about council food access projects. It gives some examples of the Penarth Food Pod that was established by the Housing Department. That's providing a service to over 75 people every week. It also talks about the Llantwit Major Food Project, where partners, including the council, have put together a set of actions that have established a More Than Food Hub in partnership with GVS at CF61. That's providing now wraparound support, advice and signposting alongside the food share pantry, a clothes bank pop-up and a chatty cafe, and 97,000 or 98,000 pounds of national lottery funding was secured to support that effort there. We've got a range of information on the council's website, and we're promoting that widely through both social media and more traditional means. So leaflets, posters, press releases, to try and make sure that as many people as possible are aware of the range of different support activities that the council operates, and also to signpost to other organisations as well. We're also working very closely with Citizens Advice to join up our referral processes so that we can support people in a more joined up way as well. We're aware that the council is a large employer. We've got about 5,000 staff, and we're committed to supporting them with a range of different methods of support. We ran, for example, a cost of living webinar back in the winter, and we've also taken the decision obviously at Cabinet in 2022 to pay the real living wage rate for our staff as well. So that's the work that the council has been doing. I don't know whether you want me to pause because Councillor Carroll is indicating.
Yes, that would be marvellous. Thank you. Councillor Carroll, would you like to raise your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for the presentation. I think I heard correctly that since the report was prepared, Tom, 158,000 of the 166,000 allocated has now been spent. Is that correct?
It's now been allocated or has been transferred to those community organisations for them to spend.
Okay, fantastic. It's just a question in relation to some of those schemes. So there's about 8,000 still to be allocated then, is that correct? If we take the indicative funding from the Food Partnership Fund out of it?
There is, yes, your arithmetic is quicker than mine, Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, it's basically the question was just in relation to, obviously I note that the Direct Food Support Fund 1, that money came in on the 6th of October, which was prior to the second one. The first question really was just out of interest, why was the money from the second fund, which came in later, allocated before the money from the first fund? It seems chronologically a bit of a strange order to do that in. And the second one, would you be able to provide a breakdown of the specific funds? So, for example, out of those funds that still had monies left allocated, I think Direct Food Support and the Warm Banks Fund are probably the two most prominent ones. How much is still outstanding on those both now as as things stand?
Certainly, Councillor Carroll. The reason potentially for the allocation of funding not necessarily being in that chronological order, as you say, is actually about the total number of, or the total value of different bids that are being received. So what we do is receive bids for a range of different, from a range of different organisations. We're really keen to make sure that we support as many of them that are consistent with the various different terms and conditions of those grants. So when a bid comes in, we look at them collectively in order to allocate it to the most appropriate fund in order to make sure that the funds go as far as they can do. In terms of the outstanding funding, so we've got about £1,000 or so in the direct food support fund, and you're right, absolutely, there's about 5,500, 6,000 in the warm banks fund left to spend, or left for us to transfer and commit to other organisations. We can certainly provide a breakdown of the funds that have been support, or the organisations who've been supported as part of that warm banks fund. Yeah, that's not a problem at all.
Could I just come back on one point there, please, Chair? Would that be okay?
Yes, fire away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, with regard to the warm banks, I won't go into anything more on that because I'm grateful to you for getting in touch, and we've got a meeting set up for tomorrow evening on that, so that's fantastic. Just one other question, really. Direct Food Support 1 and 2, are they exactly the same, or are they potentially slightly different schemes?
With your permission, Chair and Councillor Carroll, I'd like to double check the schedules just to give you an absolutely accurate answer on those ones. So I think they are, but I'd rather check to be certain, if that's okay.
Yeah, it was more a question of interest rather than anything else, but thanks for that, Tom.
No problem at all.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carroll. Thank you, Tom. Councillor Haynes, you have your hand up. Would you like to raise your query?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for the report. It's about the warm spaces, warm banks fund, really. I noticed that it's the warm spaces are very centred around large population areas, with very little, if anything, happening in the more rural Vale. I just wondered what's being done to help the people who are probably isolated and cold in the more rural areas.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I'm just having a quick look at the map now. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we've looked initially at the warm spaces at adding into existing provision, certainly in terms of how we go about doing that. There are a range of different warm spaces that are available in some of our more rural locations. So, for example, there's some provision within Wick for young people. I know Cowbridge is relatively built up, but there are some arrangements there, as well as in Pendoylan and in St Bride's as well. So there are some. However, we are very keen to expand the range of warm spaces that are available to us. Councillor Carroll made reference to a meeting that we've got tomorrow evening because he asked to have a conversation around Clondock. We've also got a meeting tomorrow in Roos as well to look at expanding the provision there. And we are looking at where it's possible, if we can then move into other areas. Certainly St Athan is one of the places that I know there's some interest from elected members in terms of how we can expand and work together on some of that. So one of the things that I will always take the opportunity to do as well with elected members is, if you're aware of initiatives within the communities that you serve and know that there is potential for warm spaces to be set up, please do let us know. We can then work to potentially join up some of the activity there. And there is still, as Councillor Carroll's question has revealed, there is still funding available as well to support those efforts.
And I would just support what Tom has said, Councillor Haynes, because the warm spaces in St Bride's was something that we, as councillors, pointed out could become a warm space. It was a community centre that was being used for a coffee morning and for other things. So we can do that work ourselves if you want to investigate in your area.
Well, I if you don't mind me coming back a little bit, Chair, I just wondered whether in the, not so much St Athan, because we have something in,
Yeah.
hopefully moving forward.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the very rural parts of the
Yes.
Vale, and whether the council should reach out to the pubs. Maybe just a thought off
Yeah.
the top of my head there. Anyway, thank you very much, Chair.
And I think one of ours in Southern Down has actually been reached out to.
Right.
So yeah, no,
Good.
it's a very good point, and why not? It's a warm place. It's open all the time, and it's where people congregate. So yeah, thank you. Anybody else with questions for Tom on this one? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think really just to, it's almost not quite reiterate some of the points that have just been made, but it was interesting that I think people are raising the same issue here as they were in Homes and Safe Communities last week, of the, what can we do in my area? And I think obviously there's a lot of opportunities, for cross-cutting work and to think about how these can best be developed in all sorts of different locations and different scenarios. And on the back of that, really, two quick points. Firstly, regarding sort of the longer term sustainability of funding and and how that's going to be managed, because I think the increase in energy prices hopefully will be rolled back as prices drop, but may not be. So how this is going to be funded on a sustainable manner as we go forward, because if there's only £8,000 left, then where's the next tranche coming from? The other is that from my perspective, from my local ward perspective, I was in a meeting last week with the Public Services Board and with Helen Moses discussing issues relating to some of the lower the lower super output areas with the highest levels of deprivation. And I noticed that there's while my ward is generally favourably covered by this in terms of Barry Library, in terms of some of the schools being involved in that Pencoitry cluster, it's also worth noting that the area of that's in my ward that falls into the highest deprivation perhaps is less well covered, and it would be interesting to explore with Tom and with others about, for example, the Central Estates in Barry, Gladstone Primary School, and how those can be supported, in not necessarily in terms of warm spaces, but in terms perhaps more of food poverty, and sort of the engagement that's already taking place in more eastern parts of Barry. How some of that can be rolled out in parts that are maybe further west, because as we said in the meeting in December, poverty isn't just an issue in the east end of Barry. There's pockets of it around the town that need to be considered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I think it is pertinent for us to remember that inflation may be one thing, but food inflation is another thing entirely. And today we've learned that it's now at 17%. And for those with the least money to spend, it impacts them far greater. Yes, in the Western Vale, we also have poverty, as you pointed out. That is absolutely true. And we are working actually with Tom and his team to provide a mobile solution to a food pantry that can hit the most rural parts of the Vale. So we are working towards that too, just so you're aware. Councillor Goodjohn, you have your hand up.
Well, I was just hoping that Tom could finish the rest of his report, as I'm aware that he wasn't quite allowed to finish before we started jumping in with questions, unless he's happy to.
Always happy to take questions as we go. Councillor Goodjohn, but thank you. And in terms of Councillor Johnson's point around exploring some of the coverage in some of those other areas, absolutely, it'd be really good to pick up as part of that work with the PSB, Councillor Johnson. And I'm aware that Gladstone Primary School have done some fantastic work in terms of supporting the community in that area. And at the other end of Halton Road, we're doing some work with the head teacher there to provide some funding to create access to food as well as warm space and some additional community spaces as well. But it would be really good to explore some of those aspects further, certainly. And that is really consistent actually with the second part of the report that's on your agenda committee this evening around an Audit Wales piece of national work that was undertaken. In November 2022, the Audit Wales team published a report called Time for Change, Poverty in Wales. It made a range of different recommendations for councils, including how we should go about organising local strategies, setting targets and performance reporting for tackling and alleviating poverty, recommendations around leadership on the poverty agenda, as well as experience mapping to create inclusive services for those people who are living in poverty. It made some recommendations around how information should be shared, specifically around the use of websites, but importantly as well about streamlining and improving application and information services for people in poverty, as well as making sure that all of that work was undertaken and complied with the socioeconomic duty. Committee will be well versed now in terms of how we respond as an organisation to those studies and recommendations from Audit Wales. We report both the report from the regulator alongside our response or our proposed response to the relevant scrutiny committees as well as governance and audit committee in order for you to consider what we're proposing as our response. That's set out in Appendix 1 to the Cabinet to the report that you've got this evening. The proposal is that we'll take those actions and that the cross-departmental group that I described earlier will have oversight of that. We'll provide regular reports back to Cabinet as well as Governance and Audit Committee, and as a committee you'll see some of that referenced in your quarterly performance reports as well. So the second part, as I say, Chair, of bringing the report this evening was just to seek any views of the committee in terms of our proposed response to those recommendations.
Thank you, Tom. Any more for any more? Oh, Councillor Goodjohn.
And now that you've finished your report, I'm happy to jump in with a couple of points. But I just wanted to note what you said, particularly about the warm spaces. And I'm very glad that you mentioned Wick Youth Club, because I know a few friends of mine who have been of real help to them that the Wick Youth Club has been turned into a warm space, and that it's a very nice and safe place for young people to gather and to work as part of the community, particularly as is said in rural areas where often they don't have that opportunity all of the time. And I appreciate what Councillor Johnson said about the importance of making sure that everywhere is covered with these warm spaces, because everyone is under threat from poverty at this time in a way that I don't think we've seen in our living memory in quite the same way, as I believe the Chair mentioned. The level of food inflation is at such a height. I just wanted to mention as well, you say about the actions that are being taken, that's detailed in Appendix 1 of the report. I was hoping that the committee would agree to ask Cabinet that we would also get to see some of those reports that go to Cabinet as well, and that we'd be able to just take a look at them ourselves, to be able to scrutinise and to show the good work that is being done by the council to make sure that people are alleviated from food poverty and also kept warm even as spring goes on.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. So yes, I think that's a reasonable recommendation that we in good time, you know, the projects are still running, aren't they? That we look at how effective that they've been, and we provide that in some format which we can all have a look at in due time. That's acceptable, Tom. Yeah. Good.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Do we have anybody else who'd like to ask any more questions about the cost of living support? No? Okay, that's wonderful. So the recommendations, we'll go back to that. So that was that the report be referred to our committee and also to the Homes and Safe Homes Scrutiny Committee. And this was for their information and in particular consideration of the Council's response to the Audit Wales report, with their views referred with the report to Governance and Audit Committee for consideration. And this was with any of the views then to go back to Cabinet for approval of the actions in response to this. So we would therefore just note what we've all seen today, and also ask for that a report of the effectiveness of these projects that have been run, so that we can see how it's been going. And I think that's covered on that particular item. So can we have a hand to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and a seconder.
I'll second.
That's wonderful. Thank you ever so much. Okay, so we move things around a little bit. So there we went to 5. I think now then we're going to be going back to item number 4. Which was referenced then from Audit Wales, Vale Glamorgan Council Assurance and Risk Assessment Review. This was for the year 21-22. And the Auditor General for Wales National Study Report on Public Sector Carbon Readiness for Net Zero 2030. This reference has come from the Governance and Audit Committee, which sat on the 12th of December 2022. So over to Tom for this one. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. And yes, this report, or this reference rather, does a couple of things. The Auditor General provides us with the Audit and Assurance and Risk Assessment Review report every year, and that was reported to Governance and Audit Committee. And what that does is set out a summary of the work that was undertaken by the regulator into the local authority in the previous year, and the report sets out some information around the findings about the council's financial position, the implications and arrangements that we've put in place to respond to the Local Government and Elections Act, including self-assessment arrangements, and then around carbon reduction plans. So the reason for requesting to swap it around was because one recommendation is made by Audit Wales in that report, and that is that we should undertake work to cost our response to the climate change declaration. So that was the reason for suggesting that we take this reference at the same, just before we take the substantive report on Project Zero. It makes reference in this report to a national study that was undertaken by Audit Wales on public sector readiness for net zero carbon by 2030. And whilst no recommendations are made in the national study, a range of different calls to action are made in that report itself, and those relate to leadership, they relate to the use of resources, as well as to a range of different activities that support net zero. So that was the reason for bringing the reference to this committee. What we're proposing in terms of our response, so in a similar way to requesting your committee's views in terms of our proposed response to the previous report, we're proposing that we will undertake work to cost Project Zero as part of our delivery of that programme of work. Committee will know that we've made reference within the medium-term financial plans refresh that came in October, and Cabinet will be considering proposals for the revenue budget in 23-24 at its meeting tomorrow, and reference is also made as part of that. So that's the initial reference covered off at a high level for you, Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Do we have any further questions for Tom on this? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Obviously, I listened to the discussion on this yesterday, and I see that Councillor Prothero was part of the discussion when this went to audit and governance and audit, a few weeks ago. And I think the wider challenge, and this is something that we we raised in this committee before the elections, back in whatever it was, March or April, was, with regards to, sort of the funding and where it should come from, and the challenges that are particularly related to decarbonisation within our wider supply chain, and the procurement issues that come from that, and fundamentally where the funding comes from to perform all of this, and sort of therefore the challenge that's there is not just in establishing how much it costs, but funding it and where that has to come from, and we can do as much as we can here, but there's also a leadership that's required on a higher and wider level that also has to be tackled within this.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Tom, would you like to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I think that illustrates exactly the complexity of the challenge here, that in terms of costing our plan, putting a price on it is one thing, obviously financing it is another, but it's also such a wide-ranging piece of work that covers every council department, as well as our community leadership role, that there is a complexity therefore in putting a price on it and identifying a variety of different funding sources, and some of the work that certainly we're undertaking at a board level is looking at the range of different opportunities that some of the external funding might offer us, in order to try and make sure that what we're doing in terms of the utilisation of that funding is consistent with the Project Zero commitments. So yes, it's a work in progress.
And I think that national audit report that we had as an appendix is actually brilliant in the questions, that the rhetorical questions that it's asking of us, for Scrutiny and for you as well, Tom, because those sort of questions, can we demonstrate decarbonisation is at the core of day-to-day business decisions and operations? That statement alone, you could probably work on that for days, couldn't you? It's such a difficult but essential piece of work, this.
Absolutely, and is one of the is the reason why it's one of the three critical challenges that, as an organisation, the annual delivery plan is focusing in on now for 2023-24. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Councillor Franks, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, indeed. I might be a little bit confused, but within this report, there's the assurance and risk assessment review of the Vale of Glamorgan Council. Yes, so we're focusing on that as well as decarbonisation. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, because we quite rightly have been focusing a lot on decarbonisation. And if you bear with me a second. On, I think, page 6, there's reference to, and I'll read the whole paragraph 11. The council has a mixed track record of delivering its savings targets. Although the council achieved its significantly reduced savings target of 247 in 2021, there was a shortfall. And so it goes on. I'm sure Tom knows this off by heart, as do the other members of the committee. Do you have a comment on this? And given the forthcoming budget that's going to depend on a lot of savings, how confident are you that we can overcome what the auditors see as a weakness? Although I've got to say, some of us don't want to see these savings, because in reality they're cuts. But I'll put that to one side, shall I? I'd like your views, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. Yes, you're right. The report covers the regulators' main areas of focus for the council, and does include, as I said in the introduction, a review of the financial position, and the regulators did summarise that we remain well placed to maintain our financial resilience. We've increased our usable reserves, but absolutely we need to determine how we meet the budget gap over the medium term, and that includes how we identify savings as well as income, and how we use our reserves, and that's the purpose of the report that Cabinet will be considering now tomorrow. So you'll note that the years that the Auditor General is making reference to are those during the pandemic as well, when council services were clearly stretched and finances were at a very different level, and at the end of a period of funding reduction over a sustained period. And I know that the Cabinet report that is going to be launching the consultation, including with scrutiny committees, sets out how a more collaborative approach than ever has been taken to constructing the draft budget for consultation purposes, which has included lots and lots of discussion about the various different approaches to income, to savings, and to the use of reserves as well. So, and committee will obviously have an opportunity next month to consider that in detail.
Thank you, Tom. One of those years, didn't we make a surplus of over £30 million?
Councillor Franks, you'll have to forgive me that finance wasn't in my portfolio during that year, so I would need to defer to my my colleagues within finance to be certain of the figure that you've just quoted.
Okay, that will be interesting. But thank you for your comment that you previously made, but you haven't really given me any comfort that we will actually be able to achieve the declared savings with even greater pressure in the forthcoming year. As far as the council budget is concerned, that becomes even more important. So I'm afraid fine words, butter no parsnips. I don't really know what that phrase means, but it seems appropriate.
and I certainly don't want to butter parsnips, Councillor Franks. In order to provide you with a little bit more hopeful reassurance, as I say, as a strategic leadership team, we've spent a long time looking at different ways of the budget proposals producing a balanced picture for next year. You're right, it's an incredibly challenging time. We have got a significant number of different colleagues that are involved in this process, and we have got mechanisms established that would then oversee, track and monitor those savings being delivered, and we're considering what resources we need to support that in the coming year. So a lot of work is going underway to do that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
That's okay. Thank you, Councillor Franks. Councillor Goodjohn, would you like to ask a question?
I just wanted to quickly comment on what Councillor Franks just said. I want to make sure that we don't start debating the budget under any circumstances. We have plenty of time for that at the next meeting. But I just want to say that there are movements in the council of ways that we can make sure we do deliver on savings next time round, including, I think the budget includes ensuring that all savings include specific targets as to what we're saving, rather than, as I've criticised before, a general savings target for the whole department, so that we know exactly what we're trying to save on, when instead of it trying to be more of a hope, it's more of a we will. And it means that we can properly scrutinise and properly target of what we're saving on, and making sure that what we're saving on is exactly what needs to be saved on, rather than the things that are already down to the bone because of, as we know, Conservative governments at Westminster.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And I think that that's the collaboration that Tom has been talking about that's been going on behind the scenes. So we look forward to seeing more of that in the next couple of weeks. Does anybody else have any more questions? Tom, have you finished your report before I rush everybody on?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you, Chair.
brilliant. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything else that they'd like to say on this particular reference? No? Okay, that's wonderful. So we'll move to the recommendations, and there are a number, so I'll just go through them one at a time. I think within Tom's presentation, he started with the reasons for the recommendations, so I won't repeat that. But recommendation number 1 was that the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee note the progress detailed in this report in relation to the challenges within the Climate Change Challenge Plan. The second is that we approve the recommendation that overall progress be reported twice a year, which will be in addition to progress reported as part of our quarterly performance monitoring reports and specific topic related reports, the Green Infrastructure Plan and transport
Sorry,
issues.
Chair. I think Tom wants to come back. I'm not sure if we've jumped reports, have we, Tom?
Have I moved on to the next one already?
Yes. We're still on the
I
reference, Chair.
I
On
do
the
apologise.
the audit and assurance risk assessment bit.
I do apologise. Hang on. I will get back to you now.
Yeah, so there's 2 recommendations with that one, Chair.
Here we go. So this is then, please forget what I just said, everybody. So that's the contents of the Vale of Glamorgan Council Assurance and Risk Assessment Review 2021-22 be noted, and along with any comments or further recommendations from the Scrutiny Committee be referred to Cabinet thereafter, which we don't have. 2 was that the contents of the appended Public Sector Readiness for Net Zero Carbon 2030 National Report and the Council's response be noted, and that the report referred to the Environmental and Regen Scrutiny Committee and to this committee with any further recommendations and comments be referred to Cabinet thereafter for their consideration and endorsement of the proposed actions to address. So can we have, please, a hand to move on this particular reference?
So just to check, Chair, are we forwarding any comments on to Cabinet on those 2 points, or are we simply noting?
So no, for further recommendations and comments to be referred to Cabinet thereafter. So the comments to go to, please.
Right, so the comments from the committee tonight.
Yes.
Is that right? Yes, okay, no, that's fine, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. So can we move on that one? Is that okay? Yes, thank you. I see a hand, Councillor Goodjohn, and a hand from Councillor Hanks. That's wonderful. Okay then, so now we move on to agenda item number 6, which is the net zero report, and this is going back to Tom.
My
Thank you very
apologies
much.
that it's me again, Chair.
It's okay.
So this is the Project Zero update report for your committee. It was also taken to Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee yesterday evening, and it provides an update on the challenge plan following the declaration of both climate and nature emergencies, gives an overview of the activity that's underway, and this follows the report that was last considered by the committee in July of 2022. A number of recommendations were made by scrutiny committees as a result of that report, including providing further hyperlinks and other means of access to relevant background reports, a greater emphasis as well on the barriers, emerging risks and challenges associated with delivering the programme, and consideration around timescales and the potential use of RAG ratings as well. Councillor Carroll, I think, at the committee in July also asked for some further information around the financial aspects of the project, for example, the use of reserves. The report that's before your committee this evening has got an appendix which goes some way, I think, to addressing the requests of the committee. We've had a new programme manager start with us in mid-November of last year, and one of her priorities immediately has been to strengthen the reporting arrangements around Project Zero. So we do recognise that there's still a way to go in terms of reporting, but I hope committee this evening will see that there's been some positive developments in terms of the breadth of the information that's being provided to elected members. So The challenge plan sets out the activities that the council is taking to reach the 2030 goal of net zero for the public sector, but also contributing to a net zero Wales by 2050. Committee be aware that there are 18 challenges set out in that plan across 3 different themes, with lots of different activity contributing to different challenges. And as I say, Appendix A sets out the progress that has been made since the last report against each of those 18 challenges. And the 3 themes of the challenge plan are around demonstrating strong leadership in the community, fulfilling our responsibility to current and future generations, as well as making a difference now. The covering report itself highlights some of the particular areas of progress that has been made since we reported in the summer. It talks, for example, in terms of demonstrating strong leadership around our attendance at a range of different community conversation events in Llandud Major and Penarth. We're shortly going to be launching the more interactive web pages around Project Zero, which will allow the public and our partners to have more of a conversation about some of the work that is underway and to get information and advice. We're shortly to launch an online training module for council staff in order to develop skills, as well as currently consulting on the Public Services Board wellbeing plan for next year, as well as recently concluding the ADP consultation for the council. In terms of fulfilling our responsibility to current and future generations, the report highlights the work that is being done to develop a new green infrastructure plan, the ongoing review of the local development plan progressing, as well as drawing attention for members to the active travel network map, which was approved by Welsh Government recently, and giving some information about the progress being made to install new public electric vehicle charging points across car parks in the Vale, with more plans in place for further electric vehicle charging points in 2023. The report also makes reference to the Council's investment and growth plan, including the Barry placemaking plan and the public consultation that has been undertaken on the waste strategy. We've also installed a range of automatic water meter reading devices across the council's estate in order to reduce the amount of water leaks and be able to respond to those quicker. And I'm really pleased to say that we've been able to secure funding through Ystadau Cymru, which is the Welsh Government Assets Group, in order to support some studies to look at decarbonising the 22 community centres in the portfolio, as well as a couple of buildings that are leased out to GVS. So understanding how we can potentially look to make those net zero or reduce their carbon impact. There's some internal work reference, Chair, within the report in terms of making a difference now. Work is underway to refresh the procurement policy and strategy, and that will come to your committee in the coming months with an emphasis around decarbonisation. There's also some work underway to complete hybrid heating systems in the council's housing stock. Over 40 homes have had that work done to date. And there's a range of information provided in the report around work within schools in terms of condition survey work, in terms of lighting schemes, etc. Cabinet also agreed the Public Services Board new Staff Healthy Travel Charter in December of last year. That introduces a more stretching set of commitments for the organisation in supporting our staff to travel in a more environmentally friendly way, and work has commenced this week within the council to review our digital strategy in order to look at different ways of undertaking our business and supporting our staff to work. So that's some of the highlights of the and progress that the report draws attention for committee to. There's a section in the report as well around the use of data and prioritisation of activity. We're having a conversation with the Project Zero board at the end of this month in order to look at setting those priorities for maximum impact in the coming year. And the report also provides some information for committee around the amount of carbon emissions for the local authority. And committee will remember that we report our carbon emissions to Welsh Government categorised into 3 scopes. The first being our direct emissions, so things like our use of fuel, and then when you get into scope 3, that's the supply chain piece. So that's where the vast majority of our carbon emissions actually sit. So that's where 89.5% of our emissions are. So there's an importance there around understanding the supply chain, and a particular importance around our procurement strategy. So that's the reason for undertaking that work. The report also makes reference to some work that we've commissioned as an organisation to understand the wider carbon emissions through different sectors for the Vale of Glamorgan as a county as a whole. And we'll be looking to bring that report to committee with your next update. We've received the initial draft, and I've just gone back with some comments to the consultants to ask them to do a little bit more work on that to understand it. So that'll help us then in terms of our leadership commitments in order to understand the emissions at a county level. The report goes on then to talk about use of resources. Councillor Carroll, as I said, asked for some further information around the use of reserves, and there's a table that is set out in that report with the current and projected balance of those reserves at year end, and there's further information that will be provided in that report I mentioned about the revenue budget proposals. There's also a range of different information there about the resources that are being used to support different decarbonisation efforts within schools, as well as the council's housing stock. So hopefully, again, committee will see a response to some of the comments at your last meeting. We've also introduced some further arrangements in terms of how, as a Project Zero board, we consider requests for use of those reserves in order to make sure that we're making maximum value out of them. The report also finally, in terms of resources, makes reference to the £20 million that Welsh Government announced as part of its budget in terms of decarbonisation schemes across Wales, and we're awaiting further details of the Vale's allocation of that, alongside the shared prosperity funding, which is one of the things that I was alluding to in response to Councillor Johnson's point around looking at sources of funding to support these efforts. And the SPF fund has got specific allocations within it to address decarbonisation schemes in the local community. So further information will be forthcoming as we move into that piece of work. And then the report also draws attention to committee's attention to the annual delivery plan, as I mentioned previously, Project Zero being identified as one of 3 critical challenges for the organisation, alongside the cost of living and organisational resilience as we move into the next financial year. And I also referenced the Vale of Glamorgan Public Services Board Wellbeing Plan, which is currently being consulted upon, and that's got a draft wellbeing objective of a more resilient and greener Vale, with a series of different actions that we would look for public sector partners to take in order to progress this particular agenda as well. So that gives you a bit of a summary about the breadth of work that is currently underway, with Appendix A providing a little bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Tom. And it is clear that much progress has been made since the last report, and that amendments to that report have made it easier to read, and also very, very pertinent, the things that are being done, which is wonderful to see. I can see Councillor Franks has got his hand up, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Number of points. First of all, apologies, I can't find Appendix A, and the moment the meeting finishes, I'll discover it, or I'll speak to Tom tomorrow. So bear that in mind. Regarding decarbonising community centres, is it the intention that the authority fully funds this work, or is there going to be an element of match funding? And I would say, and we all know the financial problems, to expect volunteers to make a substantial contribution to such a scheme will be challenging. And flowing from there, in the back of my mind, last year, we discussed and noted that the upgrading of, I think, Llanfair School was deferred for some time, and that involved many environmental matters. So that being the case, how confident are you that we'll be able to catch up with that school programme, but also take on board the 20 or so community centres? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. Appendix A follows on page, I think it's 16 of the pack relating to this agenda item, but I can certainly send it to you as a standalone document as well, so you can have a look at that after the committee. In terms of the community centre work, so the first piece of work that we've secured the funding for is to undertake those 24 surveys of potential decarbonisation measures. So the first piece of work we need to do is understand what potential there is that exists across those 24 different buildings. In terms of the arrangements then for undertaking those works, the different buildings have got different arrangements in terms of the maintenance of those buildings. So I'm certainly not suggesting that there's an expectation that volunteers would be meeting the cost of doing those works. It would be in line with the arrangements that we've got in place with those different groups in terms of their maintenance. And absolutely, we will look to prioritise funding where it's available. And as Councillor Johnson queried earlier, the availability of funding, we'll always look to make good use of external funding to maximise the impact that it can have. With your permission, Councillor Franks, I will need to speak with my colleagues in Learning and Skills to get you an update in terms of that Llanfair School, in terms of progress and confidence in catching up on that programme. It's not something I have specific detail of this evening, but I'll get you an answer.
Okay, thank you. And I've now found Appendix A, thanks to Tom, and it could not be plainer than anything else. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. Next, we've got Councillor Goodjohn with his hand up.
Hi, and thank you for this report. And I think I say this every time, but it does show how far we've come already in such a short period of time, with the challenges that we've faced, as we've already talked about, the cost of living and the pandemic. Quickly to note, I saw, I would love to give the paragraph for you, but I've just lost it now. But it states that our carbon emissions, 89.5% of it was from procurement of Scope 3 emissions. I was just wondering if you believe this was higher than you expected from before, and did you think that the new procurement plan was good enough and strong enough to be able to meet the unbelievable demand that it's going to now have to take? Because I knew that procurement was a very, very high amount of our carbon emissions, but since it is so incredibly high, it will take on an enormous amount of the load of us reaching Project Zero by 2030.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I think firstly, it's important to say that this is the second set of returns to Welsh Government in terms of measuring our carbon emissions. Welsh Government made some refinements to the methodology for quantifying carbon between those two returns, and also it's important, I suppose, for us to note that the first year of activity covered by that carbon measurement was during the pandemic. So you can't, unfortunately, directly compare the 2 years yet, but we're hopeful that next year's return will mean that we can see a pattern emerging. In terms of the 89.5%, I suppose that's, I don't know whether that's what I expected or not, but I think what it does demonstrate is that a significant amount of work has been underway across the public sector for a number of years to take action to decarbonise. So we've been undertaking work to reduce our consumption of power through heating and certainly lighting in corporate buildings for a long time. And we've been looking at how we can support staff to travel in a more sustainable way, for example. So I suppose it's less surprising that the amount of emissions are at that level in scopes 1 and 2. In terms of scope 3 and the supply chain and the procurement, I think that is what shows the real value of the work in terms of our revised procurement strategy and policy. We're doing some work now to further understand what those emissions actually mean, because within that 89.5%, you see a range of different things being procured. So that could be materials to build things, to resurface roads, but it also includes a significant amount of money that we spend on commissioning things like domiciliary and residential care for our residents. So clearly what we'll need to do in terms of responding to that will depend on the different activities that we're buying. So yes, a significant amount of work is going to be required on that, and that procurement strategy is going to be a key piece of the jigsaw. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. The percentage of carbon emissions being on scope 3 for the supply chain is pretty consistent with other authorities. And I think that our ambition as an authority will be that where you will choose carbon zero as your first default, and this will be something that will be culturally embedded into what we do. Your procurement strategy can help because it can steer you in the right direction, and we can evaluate and we can weight questions on these things. But the choice comes from when we decide if we are going to buy something, which is less of a procurement function and more of everybody thinking, do I actually need to buy this first? Is it something that I've already got that I could reuse? Can I repurpose something? And then within the specification, you have to think carbon zero. You have to think no waste. And I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but it is something that we all have to get our head around, and everybody has to play their part. Anyway, thank you, Tom. And it's on to our next question, which is coming from Councillor Johnson. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's helpful to be reminded we have a procurement expert in the room during this discussion. So I think it is very relevant. I will come back to procurement myself in a moment, but I'd just like to start off by discussing the format of the report, because I think that it's very helpful having a report that's in a bit more detail and structured in terms of that Appendix A. I think that having the climate change plan on a single page, I think is quite helpful as an introductory point for people to be able to read and see that at a glance, the different sentences, the challenges, and then having that format of this is what's happened, this is what we're doing, and here are the risks and challenges, I think is quite helpful. You'll be pleased to know, Chair, I'm not going to try and go through all 18 challenges, because one of the problems of having so much detail is that it leads you to ask more and more questions, and I don't want to bog us down in that tonight. Where this at the moment, though, this is because it was still in the foothills. There's a lot of information here. So on the one hand, there's 11 years we gave ourselves between the 2019 declaration of a climate emergency and 2030, and we are roughly a third of the way through that. A lot of work has gone on in a very short space of time in the last year, because some of the previous time maybe has been allocated to dealing with immediate challenges relating to the pandemic, etc. But where we are at the moment is that is that we're still within those 18 challenges. We're having a lot of information about here are the different things that are going on, and as time goes by, we're starting to, I think Tom is starting to pick out, or the relevant officer is starting to pick out the challenges and risks associated with some of the actions, because planning the actions is fine, and then you start doing things and you go, oh, that hasn't turned out the way that we hoped it would. So as we go forward, I think, having maybe the brag rating or reporting by exception, as we do with our more traditional reports, will help us focus us as councillors when we're reading the report and saying, okay, this has been identified as a problem. This is what we should be, asking Tom about, or the relevant officer to come and talk to us and explain why this is an issue. So at the moment we've got a list of things that are underway, but without necessarily categorising them. Then I'm sat there going, okay, well, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds good. Oh, that sounds good. And not necessarily going into not knowing where to focus the depth of scrutiny, because with the limited space that we've got, what should we go after? So in that respect, the things that crop up here within the challenges are, for example, where we've put is it heating into places, but we found it might be carbon, good for the carbon, but it's more expensive to run. So people want to reject it on the basis of cost of living crisis at the moment, where we've got challenges in recruiting enough staff to deliver on some of the proposals that are being made, where we've got issues with retrofitting. So there's an interesting mix here of, we're developing strategies, which are great, but strategies then have to be implemented. And as things are being implemented, we're spotting challenges. Where does the funding come for more wormeries? Where are the staff coming from? Great to have a plan, but as we go through, the next iteration of this, I think, we need to have some of those, challenges teased out. And just then finally, 2 points on, I'm looking forward to, I think, the energy review. I think that'll be very interesting. And I think that I'm looking forward to the procurement strategy as well, because I think, that this is a good place to sort of ask some of the questions about what the procurement strategy looks like, how it integrates with other organisations, decarbonisation plans, because fundamentally once we move from that, reuse, do we really need to replace, can we reuse, etc., into actually getting things, how is that going to fit in amongst the other priorities that we also have for procurement? So we have, because we're often interested in getting value for money, but not necessarily getting it being cheap. We're interested in things being done locally. We're interested in the community benefits that we can get from these things. How are these all, how do we avoid a situation where everything's a priority and therefore nothing's a priority? And I look forward to, reading that and seeing how it looks. It also, I think, if you got more information on the scope 1, 2, and 3, that might also be interesting for committee. And I do remember, having a look at a private sector version of this, which I don't think was particularly different, but I think it took them a bit by surprise as to how much was caught up in the supply chain and in the creation of whatever it was they were doing. And so they thought they were doing very well because their scope 1 stuff, the automatic in what's in front of us and what do we do, was they thought they'd done quite well. And then when they started asking questions about the makeup of the supply chain, suddenly lots of other things opened up as questions about how this is done and how we influence, or we influence those people a couple of steps down, who maybe won't have as a priority, but will do if we tell them it's our priority. But how we get that fairness within that supply chain also will be really interesting. So I look forward to seeing that. But I've got one of those comments about the wider presentation of the report. Very good improvement, but I would like to see the RAG rating as we go forward, so that will help focus us in terms of what questions we should ask. Thank you, Chair. Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, and I echo an awful lot of what you said there. And if I remember rightly, Tom, correct me, we had the new officer who was recruited in November, and that is that is the next step, isn't it? That you're going to provide RAG ratings and categorise these, so that again there is more that we can talk about next time. Thank you.
Absolutely, and Councillor Johnson's point around reporting by exception is one that we're particularly keen on in terms of the board, given the breadth of the activity. The focus that I want to spend with the other board members at the end of this month is running a session that says, okay, well, actually, lots of this is potentially business as usual, or there are really good mechanisms in place to deliver that work. But what are the areas that we need to put further momentum or emphasis on? And they're the things that we need to be tracking and keeping a particularly close eye on alongside that business as usual. So that's the intended approach. And I hope that will then transfer into something that will give you as a committee, alongside Environment and Regeneration Committee and Cabinet, the ability to see the specific focuses that are being given in that way. So yeah. We'll be reflecting that in the next iteration.
Thanks very much. Councillor Haynes, you have your hand up.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, and thank you, Tom, for another good report. A couple of things. First off, and it might be because I've come into this 3 years on from the thing, but there's no clear global plan of action as far as I can see. And it might be because I've missed it from not being here before. But, I can't clearly see where we've started and where we're trying to get to. Because, the reality is we will never hit zero as much as we dream it. But another little point, and it's to do with number 7 on your challenge plan. A modal shift away from cars to more sustainable form of transport. And the obvious thing to me there, it would be an integrated public transport system, which isn't mentioned. What it is, it's what I'm getting the impression is we're talking about cycleways and footways, which again is very good in towns and urban environments, but not that good in rural areas. So, I would have liked to seen some work in trying to put some money into buses and maybe working with, a bus company to try and actually get some buses. And one last point, if you don't mind, I find it strange that the council aren't trying to put PV on every southerly facing roof, including residents. That will give us an income stream as well as solving a carbon issue. But thank you, Tom. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Tom, would you like to come back on any of those points about the global plan, possibly? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. And I'm assuming by global plan you mean a plan for the organisation as a whole, rather than the world as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I say global plan of action is you have the global plan and what are your action points at a high level to achieve it.
Absolutely, and I think, Councillor Haynes, I'm glad you were saying that. I was a bit worried that I was having to do something for the whole world then. The global plan of action, I suppose, from our perspective, is that challenge plan that is referenced in the background papers, and the challenge for us as a result of that, because it's such a wide-ranging piece of work that is looking at both our internal 2030 goal as well as the 2050 one, is that it's got a series of different actions that are at lots of different levels. So some of them at a very high strategic level, some will be at a much more operational level. And as Councillor Johnson was just alluding to, in terms of the areas of particular activity and focus that we'd then be looking to take as an organisation, and reporting to you as elected members, I'm hoping that you'll start to see some of that coming through with future reports. And as I said, we've been doing lots of work that has been reducing our impact over a number of years. But it's only now in the last couple of years where we started to get that proper measurement and reporting to Welsh Government to understand in more detail where those emissions are. And what that's been really useful in doing now is giving us the information in order to really focus on certain areas. So looking at the supply chain, but breaking down the supply chain and saying, well, actually, these are the particular areas we now need to go at. And that's where I think, Councillor, you'll start to see some of those more specific measurable actions that as a committee you'll be able to really see and hold us to account in terms of where we're going. We had a really good conversation as well as a team today about public transport, and that's one of the things that, as you were just describing, the joining up of those of the transport network. I know the city region are doing a huge amount of work in terms of the metro, and perhaps what I can do is undertake in the next report to make sure that there's some more information provided to you as a committee in terms of how that is working in both rural and urban areas, to show the coverage. And in terms of solar PV, absolutely, we've got solar PV on the vast majority of our corporate buildings. I know a significant amount of work is done in terms of schools, but it is a good point in terms of our housing stock. And I know that work is underway in some areas, but again, I can get some further information around the kind of coverage that we've got and any future plans, and make sure that that's included in future reports as well.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. And I have the similar thought about the solar panels, and I wonder why, when it comes to planning for new developments, that's not a requirement that they build houses with solar panels on them. It's such, maybe I'm just oversimplifying things here, I'm sure I am, but it seems about a decade ago there were developments that must have had that requirement on them because they were doing it, and then it all went away. But it seems quite an obvious thing, and I know we're doing a very good job with our own buildings, but let's make sure any others that are built also are the same and have those panels on them. Anyway, over to Councillor Wood. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Good evening, Tom. A lot of what I want to ask has been covered, but it comes back down to the procurement again. And I'm looking here and it says engagement with local supply stakeholders. How much, because as it says here, November 22 to March 23, how much engagement has gone on so far? And has there been any opposition from any of the suppliers to being going through the inquisition of trying to quantify their carbon contribution?
Thank you, Councillor Wood. We've only recently started to have those conversations with some of the existing suppliers. So I think it would be too early to give you an indication of that, but certainly within the covering report that will come to committee with the procurement strategy, we will include some feedback from potential suppliers. And what the draft strategy looks to do is not mandate one set of requirements for every type of purchase, and importantly not for every type of supplier as well. So we recognise that different scale organisations will be or will have the ability to quantify their carbon. So if we're buying from very large organisations, we would have different expectations than if we were buying from a smaller scale local supplier as well. So I think it's important to say that we won't have one minimum set of, or we won't have one set of expectations of everything that we buy from every different type of scale of supplier. So we recognise that different organisations are on different parts of their journey and have different abilities to respond to this. We're awaiting some information from the WLGA, who are producing some guidance on procurement in terms of decarbonisation, specifically to support councils in order to work with local suppliers to jointly undertake some of this decarbonisation work as well. So it's going to be, in some instances, a joint endeavours, and understanding that actually working together, we should be able to support those organisations to both trade with us and also to do so in a more environmentally sustainable way.
Okay, I mean, yeah, it's notoriously difficult to to benchmark these types of things, because obviously people count it all in slightly different ways. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the strategy. And obviously the chair is quite experienced in procurement and trying to quantify these things. I've done something similar in a different life. And yes, it is a lot more work than anybody thinks it is. And it is actually quite difficult. Eventually, you do have to find a way to produce some sort of benchmarking, and it's not easy to achieve. So I wish you luck, and I look forward to seeing the strategy in the next few meetings. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I like to think that every supplier is capable of producing some sort of evidence to show what they're doing to reduce their carbon emissions. Even if we ask them to just demonstrate what they're going to do, change your light bulbs, switch your lights off, really simple stuff. They can all do something. I've always had that thought, which is why it's something I always have used in an evaluation methodology way. Anyway, sorry, on to, I think, Councillor Woods, you still got your hand up. Was there more you wanted to ask? I'm sorry. Or is it legacy?
No, sorry, that's a legacy.
That's fine. Sorry. Thank you. Councillor Hanks, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Tom. I just wanted to ask you quickly, is the new Cowbridge Primary School, which is currently being built in the grounds of Cowbridge Comprehensive School, a zero carbon school?
I knew you'd ask me a question, Councillor Hanks, that I didn't have the immediate answer to.
Oh, that's
with
okay.
Your
I see it's under Trevor Baker, so I can easily send it. I just don't remember reading about what it is, and I just assumed it would be, but maybe it's not. So
I'll get the information back to you tomorrow morning, Councillor Hanks.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanks. Councillor Carroll. Would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for that. I had trouble pressing the button. Just a few questions, Tom, in relation to the challenges that are set out in the report. Really, it's just I think a lot of the challenges make a lot of sense. I mean, I think, to give an example, sustainable transport. If you want to move towards net zero, then investing in forms of transport that aren't cars is a good way of doing that. It's just a question really in relation to bus routes. Will we be looking to place more emphasis on improving access to bus routes? Now, I appreciate that obviously a lot of this is done by private companies and it's not an issue for the council, but I am aware that in the past we have provided subsidies for certain routes, and whether that could be something we could look at. I look at my own ward of Llandoch, a recent change made by Cardiff Bus rerouted the 95, I think it was, through Ferry Court instead of via Leckwith Road. And that means now that at the top end of the village, where there are a large proportion of elderly residents, the bus doesn't come there, it only comes further down. And so that's going to potentially mean that far fewer people use the bus than would have done before, because they can't walk up the hill to get to the bus stop. So that's one point. And then on the second one, I just wanted to clarify challenge 10, reduce waste. Says in the report that the search for a new household waste recycling centre is concluded and that no land was available. Does that mean that it's going to be staying where it is in Landau? And further to that, if that is the case, what's going to happen to the money allocated in the capital programme for that project?
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. In terms of the bus routes, absolutely, you're right in the sense that the council has played its role in supplementing some of the commercial bus routes, and I'll certainly provide the feedback to my colleagues in transport in terms of looking at the areas of coverage in terms of Llandoch, and I will get you an update in terms of the proposed replacement of that waste recycling site in terms of Landau in the morning as well, if I may.
Thank you. Just one other thing as well, Chair, if you'll indulge me. This may come outside the remit of this committee, so if that's the case, feel free to refer it to Environment instead. It's just a question on Challenge 11 on the flood risk. When you actually read the report, it then talks about water meter reading devices. I would have thought that flood defences would be the best way of tackling flooding.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll, and with your indulgence, Chair, that was also picked up at yesterday's Environment and Regeneration Committee.
Right, okay.
Councillor Carroll, and I think it's a formatting error in terms of the information on flooding not having been put into the final version of the papers for you. We'll circulate some supplementary information around flooding for you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Carroll. Does anybody else have any other questions now for Tom on the update? No? That's great. So this time I will endeavour to read to you the correct recommendations, starting with recommendation number 1, and that is that the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee note that the progress detailed in this report in relation to the challenges within the Climate Change Challenge Plan. 2, that the committee approves the recommendation that overall progress be reported twice a year, and that's in addition to progress reported as part of the quarterly performance monitoring reports and specific topic-related reports, for example, on the Green Infrastructure Plan and on transport issues. 3, that the committee note the funding available in reserves and the arrangements proposed to approve the use of reserves to progress future schemes. 4, that the committee note the information provided with regards to the Council's carbon emissions as reported to Welsh Government in the autumn of 2022. 5, that the committee refer this report and comments to Cabinet to be considered alongside the comments of the Environmental and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, who considered this report yesterday on the 17th of January. And 6, that the committee recommend to Cabinet that this report is distributed to all elected members, members of the Public Service Board and all town and community councils. So can we have a hand to move on those recommendations, please? Who have we got? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. And can we have a seconder?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Okay, so then I think now we can move on to agenda item. Oh, hang on. No, Tom, Mark.
Only a very quick one, Chair.
Yeah.
Obviously, in terms of the recommendation about referring comments onto Cabinet, was there anything that committee in particular wanted to refer in terms of comments back to the to Cabinet from the discussions today? Was there anything of particular sort of interest that they'd want to refer it back to?
Well, we've already discussed in the last meeting the changes to the report with the RAG ratings and the categorisation. So that's going to, we don't need to repeat that, do we? No. And I think that the general discussions, and a lot of them were valid, are comments that we would want to feed back up to Cabinet if that's possible, Mark.
Yeah, it's fine. We can put some kind of summary in.
There was a lot, but still, it would be good if they could see all of their comments.
Yeah, of course, Chair. We'll put a summary in as well. It's part of the recommendations. Fine.
That's great. Thank you very much. So item number 7, which was any items which the chairs decided are urgent, part 1, and there aren't any. Item number 8, part 2, which are items the chairs decided are urgent that are to be seen not in the public eye, and there aren't any. So we are now at the end of the meeting, and I can tell you all that the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 15th of February at 6 p.m. So all that leaves me to say now is to you all, have a nice evening. If you're going out, please take care. It's looking pretty nasty out there, and we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.